Good morning, friends. Dick Blackwell again. It's Monday morning, April I don't even know, 13th, 14th. It's an interesting time. Well, this morning I'm going back to Greenwood. Yesterday I told you about that Easter Sunday in Harrisonburg, which was so wonderful. And I've gotten a lot of response from people saying, I was there, I was one of them, or I observed. And be honest, I had forgotten. I didn't remember anybody who we baptized, but now I've learned about 10 people out of the 30. It was an interesting, wonderful experience. Anybody that was there never, ever forgot it, and most people told that story a lot of times. But today I want to go back to Greenwood. In the first semester, I was taking a class on preaching, and each student had to do a sermon in the chapel of the seminary, and so I did my first one, and the teacher would pick a couple of students along with him to critique each sermon. So I did my little sermon, about 10 minutes, and afterwards the teacher said, have you ever preached before? I said, no, that was the first time ever I did that. The only other thing I'd ever done in church was to lead a junior high Sunday school class on Sunday nights. He said, well, I guess that explains it. And that was all he ever said. They didn't really critique it. He just said, it explains it. And so a little bit later, a week or so later, he said, there are a lot of little ARP churches, that's Associated Reformed Presbyterian, churches around South Carolina and into North Carolina that don't have full-time pastors, and we usually supply those churches through seminary students. Would you be interested? And actually he insisted that he thought it would be a good idea for me to do it to practice preaching. So I agreed to do it, and so Becky and the 3 kids and I would take off on a Sunday morning to some assigned church, and I would preach. And usually the churches didn't have a lot of people, varied. But anyway, this one Sunday we went to one, I don't remember what town it was in, but it was a real nice building. Looked like it'd seat about 250 or so. So it turns out there were 4 people. And they had an organist come over from the Methodist church across the street. She played 2 hymns and then left. And I preached to 4 people, and they didn't sit next to each other. They were sitting all over the church. And I thought, and they had another ARP church just down the street, and I thought, why don't they join that church? And I asked the professor about it. He said, well, each of those families, those 4 people there, have a lot of money, and they keep the church up, and they don't want to leave. They grew up in that church, and they don't want to change. So anyway, that was one of them, and another one I went to was in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And so we were meeting in the social hall, and I said something about, why don't we just meet in the sanctuary? And they said, we're going through a church split, and the other group is in the sanctuary, and we're here. And they didn't like each other. I thought, oh, that's strange. And then finally we went to a good church in Matthews, North Carolina, or South, I don't remember. Anyway, afterwards, that was the church with like 120 people, so it was more like a real church to me. And we went to dinner with lunch with one of the people in the church, and he had a plaque on his wall that said, carved out of wood. He said the scripture was, "You do err, not knowing the scriptures nor the power of God." And we commented about that, and he actually made one of those and sent it to us. And my son Ed has it right now, and has been a very good scripture. My dad's second cousin, I don't know which she was to us, a lady named Olga, came down to visit us. We really liked her. Wonderful. She was more like an aunt, or in Virginia, aunt. And she went with us, and I went back to that church that had 4 people before, and sure enough, it had the same 4 people, and they sat in different places, just like before. They always sat in their same spot. And after that, I went back and I told the professor, "I'm not doing this anymore. These little churches, it's not what I call church. Other than that one in Matthews, the rest of them were either church splits with about 10 people, or in some cases like this church with 4. There was no, I didn't call it church." And I said, "I don't want to do that." And but apparently a little Baptist church just outside of Greenwood had called and said that their pastor had left. They were looking for a supply pastor for a while they had a search going on. So he recommended to them to talk to me. So they called me, and I went and met with them. And they said they were looking for a pastor, but they wanted somebody to preach every Sunday. And it was a church of about 120, 130. They wanted to preach every Sunday and would like me to come once a week, I think an evening, afternoon, and stay until about 8 to be able to counsel or talk to people. In addition to that, I would to meet with the deacons once a month just to go over church business. So I agreed to do that, and that was a good experience. My preaching obviously was not that great, but it was acceptable to them. But before I started, when I talked to them the first time, I said, "Well, now, one thing you need to know, I'm considered a charismatic." And they said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Well, I believe in the gifts of the Spirit for today, and including I pray and worship in tongues sometimes." They said, "Well, will you do that from the pulpit?" I said, "No, probably not." They said, "Okay, well, we don't care." I said, "All right, that's no problem to you." Not all Baptist churches were quite that liberal, especially at that time. So I did this for about 3 months on a regular basis. They paid me a little. It wasn't great, but every little bit helped in those days. But I didn't do it for the money, because I felt like I needed to. If I was going to the seminary and preparing, I didn't know for what, but if I was going to preach, I needed to practice, learn how. I guess they were all my guinea pigs, so to speak. But after about 3 months, I said, "How's this search going?" And they said, "Well, we like you. We're not even looking for anybody." I said, "Well, that's a mistake, because I'm not going to stay here. I tell you what, I'm going to give you 1 more month, and that's all I'm going to be." And I don't think they understood, but I felt like a substitute preacher supply with no more than I was doing. I didn't know a lot of the people in the congregation. They weren't being looked after. It wasn't my idea of church. Church is where people are known, they know each other, they support each other. I'm sure they had relationships, but as the pastor of the church, it wasn't my understanding of how that should be. Because I was just going in and preaching on Sunday, leaving. I came once a week, and half the time I just sat there for about 3 or 4 hours. I wasn't involved in the church the way I believe a pastor should be. So I stopped doing that. But I think I told you that we had a home group of about 40 people. It didn't meet in my home, met with the Nicholsons. But it was, I basically was the de facto leader of that. I guess they consider because I was in seminary I should be. But that's where I learned more how to pastor, because I was keeping up with those people. It was just the Lord used seminary to help prepare me for the time when I got to Harrisonburg. Those that were in the church in the early days, I'll tell you more about that later, but my preaching never was great, but I understood the scriptures. I'd read them through numerous times from the time we made a serious commitment in Regalwood, at least once a year, plus completely through the scripture, plus studying. And so I had some good knowledge of the scriptures, and so my teaching was helpful. I just wasn't very polished. I was a civil engineer who became a pastor. I could pastor, my preaching was suspect, but my teaching, thank God, was adequate. Anyway, that was a learning experience for me with these churches, and I was going to say they got what they deserved, I guess, but they deserved more than they got from me, but that was all I could do at that time. Seminary was I did learn some things in seminary. Again, I told you that the experience 3 years in Greenwood was the real teaching. My pastor at that time, John Hipp, helped me a lot in ways of learning how to express and preach. Anyway, this is just one of some of the experiences I had in preparing. Tomorrow, I want to talk about our January term in Mexico. Really, really interesting. God bless you. Have a good day.